The Grand Forum of the Galactic Council was the most important room in the known universe. Or so the Council liked to believe. It sat inside a hollowed moon, the third moon of Veth Prime, carved out over 400 years by 17 species, working in shifts, their tools and methods so different that the walls still bore the marks of all of them. Smooth in some places, ridged and strange in others. 10,000 seats arranged in rings around a central floor, each seat calibrated to the specific atmospheric and gravitational needs of whoever sat in it. The lighting changed in 16 sections to accommodate species that saw in ultraviolet, infrared, and ranges that had no human names. It smelled, depending on where you stood, of ozone, or salt, or warm copper. It was, by most measures, a miracle of cooperation. Ambassador Yara Osei thought it smelled like a hospital. She sat in seat 7, which was humanity's seat, which had been humanity's seat for 200 years, which the Council still listed in its official registry under the heading, Provisional Pending Full Review. 200 years. Pending full review. She had stopped finding it funny sometime around her 3rd year in the post. Now it just sat in her chest, like a stone she had learned to breathe around. She was filing her nails. Not because she was calm. She had not been calm in 4 days. She was filing her nails because her hands needed something to do that was not flipping the table, and the table was bolted down, and she had already done the math on the vote, and the math did not change no matter how many times she ran it. The Keth expansion clause was going to pass. 3 million humans lived in the Oort Cloud settlements. They had been there for 60 years, building slow and careful in the dark, at the edge of the solar system. Ice miners, researchers, families who liked the quiet, whole communities that had grown up knowing nothing but the long black and the faint pinprick of a distant sun. The Keth Dominion wanted a trade corridor. The corridor went through the settlements. The motion called for relocation. The word times, compensated times, appeared 4 times in the text, and each time it appeared, it was followed by the word times, fairly, and the word times, fairly times, had been defined in subsection 7c, in a way that Yara's legal team had described, in their official brief, as times creatively interpreted times and, in private, over drinks, as times a joke in bad faith. She had spent 3 months building a coalition. She had met with 40 delegates. She had brought data, projections, historical precedents, economic models showing the corridor could be rerouted at minimal cost. She had been patient. She had been thorough. One by one, the allies had flipped. The Dravani went first. Trade incentives from the Keth. Nothing outrageous. Just enough. The Sulhari followed, citing times regional stability. The Mean Collective abstained, which was the same as a no vote against her, and they all knew it. Even the Helix Federation, who had shared a research station with humanity for 80 years, and sent a representative to the memorial after the Adelaide disaster, even they had filed a quiet notice of times non-opposition. The math was done, so Yara sat in seat 7, filed her nails, and waited for the session to open. The forum filled the way it always did, gradual, then all at once. Delegates arriving in their atmospheric suits, or their translator rigs, or their suspension tanks, assistants moving through the aisles, the low constant sound of 10,000 different kinds of breathing. The Vorathi delegate arrived last, as she always did. 6,000 years old, her species so ancient they had been in the forum before. The forum had a name, her skin, the color of deep water, and her eyes entirely still. She passed seat 7 on the way to her own place. She looked at Yara. She did not say anything. But she looked. Yara did not look up from her nails. The session opened. The council speaker, a Dravani named Ixoth, who had held the post for 30 years and wore his authority the way some beings wore old coats, comfortably, without noticing, called the room to order. The sound dampeners engaged. The ambient noise dropped to nothing. 10,000 beings breathed together in the silence. The Keth expansion clause was read into the record. Yara put her nail file away. She listened to the reading. She had memorized every word, but she listened anyway, because she was a professional, and professionals listened. She heard times, fair compensation times again. She heard times, minimal disruption. She heard times, the progress of interstellar commerce. And the phrase landed in the room like something everyone was pretending not to smell. The floor opened for statement. The Keth delegate spoke for 12 minutes. He used the word times necessary, times 9 times. He used the phrase times mutual benefit, times 4 times. He did not once use the words times 3 million people, and the omission was so deliberate it had its own shape in the room. Other delegates spoke, some in favor, some with carefully worded concerns that were not, functionally, opposition. The session moved the way these sessions always moved, like water finding the path it had already decided to take. When the speaker called for any final statements from the floor, the room turned, as it always did, toward seat 7. Yara stood. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and put it on. She smoothed the front. She picked up her bag. She checked that her coffee thermos was capped. She walked to the central floor, not to the speaker's position, to the door. The sound that went through the chamber was not a gasp. It was something below a gasp, something that happened in bodies before the brain caught up. Pressure shifts, color changes, a bioluminescent ripple through the Solhari contingent that their physiologists would later describe, in papers, as in time's involuntary alarm response. Yara walked to the door at a normal pace, not fast, not slow. The walk of someone who had somewhere else to be. She did not make a speech. She did not turn around. She did not raise her hand or her voice. She did not cry, or shout, or do any of the things that species did when they wanted to signal distress. She just left. The door opened when she reached it, because it was automated, and it closed behind her, because it was automated, and the sound it made was the most ordinary sound in the universe. A door closing. In the silence that followed, the Keth delegate said something. Nobody remembered later what it was. The speaker called for order. Order was restored. The vote proceeded. The clause passed with a margin of 73%. In his seat, the Vorathi delegate had not moved, had not looked at the vote display, was still watching the door. Her aide leaned in. The motion carried, he said. I know, she said. The human delegate. I know, she said again. She was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that the aide thought she had finished. Then she said, very softly, in her own language, a phrase that translated roughly as, the first move of a long game looks exactly like giving up. The aide wrote it down, filed it, forgot about it. For now, the council called it an abstention. That was the official word. Logged in the session record, filed under seat 7, noted in the margin of the Keth expansion clause vote. Human delegation abstention by absence. Clean. Procedural. The kind of language that made messy things small. Fleet Admiral Chenvrox, of the Keth Dominion, used a different word. He used the word times theater. He said it at a dinner that same evening, a gathering of allied delegates on the Keth's orbiting station above Veth Prime, good food, and better liquor, and the warm glow of a vote that had gone exactly as planned. He said humanity was throwing a tantrum. He said they had gotten emotional, as humans often did, and walked out because it was the only dramatic option left to them. He said it would blow over in a week. He said the humans would come back, make some kind of formal statement about their objections, request a review committee, the way they always did. 5 delegates nodded. The Vorathi delegate was not at the dinner. She had not been invited, which was normal. Her species rarely attended social events, and she would not have come anyway. She was in her quarters, reading. She was reading a history of Earth. Not recent history, old history. The kind that went back before humanity reached the stars, back when they were still a single-planet species doing everything for the first time. She had read it before. She was reading it again now, the way you reread something when current events make old words feel new. She stopped at a chapter about trade wars. She read it twice. Then she put the book down and looked at the wall for a while. 3 days after Yara walked out of the forum, the first reassignment request came through. It was filed by a mid-level human diplomat named Corin Bast, stationed on the Dravani homeworld, routine paperwork. He was requesting a transfer back to Earth for personal reasons. The Drevani Foreign Affairs Office processed it without comment. Bast packed his things, said goodbye to his colleagues, and left. He hugged his Drevani assistant at the door. She cried a little. He gave her his forwarding address on Earth. Nothing about this was unusual. Then another one came. Earth's cultural liaison on Solhari Prime, requesting reassignment. Then the trade attaché from the Mean Station. Then both junior diplomats from the Helix Federation outpost. Then Over the course of 10 days, 31 more transfer requests from 31 different posts, scattered across 47 worlds. Each one was routine. Each one cited personal reasons, or contract completion, or standard rotation schedules. Each one came with a forwarding address. Each one involved a human staff member packing their personal items, saying warm goodbyes, and leaving quietly. No statements. No press releases. No official withdrawal from anything. The Keth Dominion's intelligence office flagged it on day 8. A junior analyst named Vrex had been running automated correlation scans on diplomatic movement, standard practice, and the clustering pattern had tripped an alert. He pulled the files, looked at the numbers, ran them through the Dominion's conflict prediction model, a system that had been built over 200 years to identify early signals of political escalation, resource competition, and military posturing. The model returned one word: error. Vrex ran it again. Same result. He checked the input data. Clean. He checked the model parameters. No faults. He escalated to his supervisor, a senior analyst named Preth, who had worked in the intelligence office for 40 years and had seen the model spit out errors exactly twice before. Once during the Solhari civil conflict of 2891, once during the Dravani resource crisis of 3012. Preth looked at the data, looked at the error, looked at the data again. It's not broken, she said. Then why? It's not broken, she said again. It just wasn't built for this. Vrex asked what she meant. She didn't answer immediately. She pulled up the pattern on her screen: 34 diplomatic departures, spread across 47 worlds, quiet and warm, and politely documented, leaving forwarding addresses, no anger, no statements. It's looking for escalation signals, she said. Raised voices. Resource moves. Military positioning. That's what it knows how to read. She paused. It doesn't have a category for a species that retreats without retreating. Vrex stared at the screen. So what is this? Preth pulled up an archive. She had been doing her own reading, the same way the Vorathi delegate had been doing her own reading, both of them arriving at the same shelf from different directions. She found what she was looking for: an Earth document from 2031, a post-mortem analysis of a trade negotiation between two of Earth's old nation-states. She had read it 3 times since the forum vote. She scrolled to the final paragraph and turned the screen so Vrex could read it. The last line read, "When humans go quiet, they are not conceding, they are building." Vrex read it twice. Building what? Preth closed the archive. That, she said, is the question. She filed her report that evening, marked it Priority 1. It sat in the Admiral's inbox for 2 days before he opened it. He read it the way he read everything from Preth, with the patient skepticism of a man who had been right too many times to doubt himself easily. He read the line about humans building. He read her analysis. He read the list of transfers. He closed the report. He sat for a while. Then he went back to the dinner party he had been hosting, where 4 Keth officers were laughing about something, and he stood in the doorway and watched them laugh, and he did not go in. Nobody at the dinner noticed the exact moment he stopped finding any of it funny. They just became aware, gradually, in the way you become aware of a change in temperature, not a specific moment, just a slow registering that his mood had shifted. One of the officers made a joke about human dramatics. The Admiral smiled. It did not reach his eyes. He picked up his glass and drank, and looked out the viewport at the stars, at the long dark between systems, at all the space out there that nobody had bothered to claim, because it had always seemed like nothing. Empty space. He thought about that word, empty. Preth's report had included one more line, at the very end, almost as an afterthought. He kept coming back to it. It read, "It should be noted that 17 of the 28 transfer destinations are within navigable range of the Oort cloud coordinates. The pattern may be coincidental. It may not." He looked at the stars for a long time. Nobody interrupted him. Something in the way he was standing made the room quiet around him, the way a forest goes quiet before weather arrives. The officers finished their drinks and went to bed. The Admiral stayed at the viewport until very late, looking at the dark and thinking about the difference between empty and waiting. 18 months is not a long time. In the life of the Galactic Council, 18 months was barely a breath. Civilizations had debated single motions for longer. Treaties had spent decades in committee review. The Vorathi delegate had once participated in a session that lasted, in its various continuations, for over 100 years. 18 months was a Tuesday afternoon. And yet, the Dravani Merchant Consortium noticed it first, the way the Dravani noticed most things through the numbers. Their chief logistics officer, a sharp and deeply tired woman named Sev Arath, had been reviewing quarterly shipping data for the Outer Rim supply chains, and something kept pulling at her eye. A change in the movement patterns. Not dramatic, not a sudden shift, just a quiet reorganization, the kind you almost missed because every individual choice looked completely reasonable on its own. She flagged it, sent it to her analysis team. It took 3 of their best economists 3 weeks to figure out how to explain it, and when they finally presented their findings to the consortium board, the explanation went like this. Human shipping lanes had not simply moved, they had times reorganized. The distinction mattered. Moving suggested reaction, a route changed in response to something. Reorganizing suggested intention, a system redesigned from the inside. The lanes now connected differently than they had before. The nodes were in new places. The whole network had a different shape, and the new shape was more efficient by a margin that the economists kept double-checking because the number seemed too clean to be accidental. At the center of the new shape was a transit hub. It sat in what had previously been registered as empty, navigable space at the outer edge of the solar system, the Oort cloud coordinates. It had been built, according to the construction logs, that the consortium's lawyers eventually found, after 17 layers of incorporation paperwork, by a cooperative. The cooperative was made up of families. The families were, almost entirely, former residents of the Oort cloud settlements, the 3 million who had been relocated and fairly compensated when the Keth expansion corridor was approved. They had taken their compensation. They had moved. And then, quietly, they had pooled it. And they had built. The hub itself was not impressive to look at. Practical architecture, built fast, built to work, docking capacity for mid-range freighters, processing facilities, a resupply depot, a small medical center, basic quarters for rotating staff. Nothing that would have drawn attention on its own. What drew attention was the route it sat on. The most critical resupply chain in the Outer Rim, the one that moved protein-based compounds from the inner system manufacturing clusters to the 23 stations at the edge of navigable space, now passed through that hub. Not because anyone had made it happen, not because of a mandate or a treaty or a political arrangement. Every shipping captain who had run the new route independently had looked at the numbers and made the same choice. It was simply the fastest, cheapest, most reliable path. They had built infrastructure in the one place the new Keth corridor had made strategically vital, and they had done it in 18 months. The consortium board sat with this information for a long time. Then the chair, a heavy-set Dravani named Tol Marish, who had run the consortium for 22 years and had no patience for anything he didn't understand, asked the question everyone was thinking. Did they plan this? The 3 economists looked at each other. The one who answered chose her words very carefully. The planning would have had to start, she said, before the vote. The room went quiet. Maresh looked at the map of the new shipping lanes, at the hub sitting right where it needed to sit, at the cooperative of relocated families who had pooled their times fair compensation times and put it exactly where a smart person who had seen the vote coming would have told them to put it. He rubbed his face. "Get me a protein contract," he said. "Whatever rate they're asking." The council did not discuss the hub openly. Not yet. Individual delegates had heard things. The Dravani situation was not a secret among people who tracked trade data, but there was a particular kind of institutional reluctance that set in when an organization did not want to name what it was seeing. The forum had it. They had all voted for that corridor. Naming what had happened in the 18 months since would have required also naming what the vote had set in motion, and that was an uncomfortable thing to sit with. The Vorathi delegate did not share this reluctance, but she was also not saying much. She had been in forum sessions throughout the 18 months, present, attentive, voting on other matters with her usual quiet precision, but she had stopped making statements, stopped offering analysis. Her aide had asked about it once. She had said she was watching. He had asked what she was watching for. She had said, "For what comes next?" What came next, around the 14-month mark, was the infrastructure contracts. 4 major council construction projects had been in procurement phase: a new communications relay network, an upgraded atmospheric processing system for 2 of the Outer Rim stations, a deep space navigation beacon chain, and an expansion of the forum's own medical facility. All 4 had been quietly stuck in the slow machinery of council procurement for years, waiting for viable contractors with the technical capacity to execute. In the space of 3 months, human engineering firms won all 4 bids, not by political maneuvering, not by offering prices that seemed too low to be real. They won because they had the right tools, the relevant experience, and the available teams, and they had shown up to the open tender process at the right time, with the right paperwork. The teams were largely made up of people who had, at some point in the last 18 months, filed routine transfer requests. When the pattern was pointed out to Fleet Admiral Chen Vrox, he called it coincidence. His intelligence chief, Preth, who had been tracking human movement since month 1, said nothing. She had learned, over the course of the last year and a half, that there was a particular kind of silence that was more honest than speech. It was the kind of silence humans had apparently been practicing. The Keth economic minister, a careful and politically practical woman named Ves Dalun, who had voted enthusiastically for the expansion clause and had been quietly reconsidering that vote for several months, requested a meeting with Earth's Trade Bureau. The Bureau responded within the hour. The response was warm. It included a suggested meeting time, a proposed agenda, and a note about dietary accommodations. It also included biscuits. Not metaphorical biscuits. An actual physical package of biscuits. A traditional Earth variety, packed with considerable care that arrived with the Bureau's advance team before the meeting began. The Keth minister ate one before she realized what she was doing. It was very good. The meeting was pleasant throughout. 3 hours, comfortable chairs, an Earth trade representative named Dakarai, who laughed easily and asked good questions, and gave no indication whatsoever of knowing that his government currently controlled the single most important freight node in Outer Rim supply: logistics. Nothing was agreed upon. Nothing needed to be. Both sides understood the shape of the conversation. It was, in the language of diplomacy, an opening. Dalun filed her report that night. Her summary was 2 pages. Her conclusions were 1 paragraph. The last 3 words of that paragraph, the ones her assistant underlined, the ones that would eventually be cited in 37 academic papers on the subject of Time's patient state leverage theory. Times were these. They were patient. She sat back in her chair and looked at those 3 words for a long time. Then she added 1 more sentence. We were not watching. The formal request was transmitted on a Tuesday. This was not accidental. The Council's protocol office had spent 4 weeks determining the optimal day. They had commissioned a behavioral analysis of Earth's diplomatic bureau response times by day of week, average processing speed, correlation between timing and tone of reply. The analysis had cost more than the Council liked to admit, and it had produced 1 actionable finding. Tuesday was humanity's most administratively responsive day, so they sent the request on a Tuesday. The request was 3 paragraphs long, formally worded, framed as a gesture of unity. It asked the human delegation to consider returning to the forum. It used the word times valued times twice, and the word times partnership times once. It made no mention of the ORT-hub. It made no mention of the 4 infrastructure contracts. It made no mention of the protein base resupply chain currently running through human-controlled logistics nodes. It was, as the Council's senior communications officer told the speaker before it was sent, as clean as we can make it. The speaker had not said anything to that. Just looked at the drafted text for a moment, and then told her to send it. Earth's Trade Bureau responded in 6 minutes. 6 minutes was, in diplomatic terms, almost aggressive. Normal response windows ran 12 hours at minimum. 6 minutes meant one of 2 things. Either the Bureau had been watching for the message and had a reply ready, or the reply was so clear in their minds that it required no deliberation at all. The reply was warm. It said the Bureau was happy to discuss terms of re-engagement. It said the human delegation had always valued its relationship with the forum. It said please find the attached preliminary framework for review. The attachment was 43 pages. Speaker Igzoth read it in his private chambers that evening. With his senior advisor on one side and a glass of water on the other, he read it slowly. He was a careful reader by nature, and this document required care. It was polite in every line. It used measured, diplomatic language throughout. It raised no voice, issued no threats, made no accusations. It was, under all of that, completely clear about what it wanted. A permanent seat, no more provisional status, no more times, pending full review times in the registry. A seat that was listed the same way every founding species was listed: full, unconditional, permanent. Veto access on any council motion that materially affected human-adjacent space. That phrase, times human-adjacent spacetimes, had a definition attached to it, in Appendix C. The definition was very thorough. It drew a boundary. The boundary, when the speaker's advisor mapped it against the current navigable trade network, enclosed roughly 34% of all active transit lanes in council-recognized space, including the outer rim resupply corridors, 4 of the major communication relay routes, and both planned paths for the Keth secondary corridor proposal that was currently in early discussion. 34%. His advisor sat back in her chair and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "They built this in 18 months. He said, "They started building before the vote." She thought about that. How far before? He closed the document. "I don't know. I think that's the point." The Keth delegate called it extortion. He said it in an emergency caucus of the Keth-aligned bloc, in a room with no official record, 3 days after the framework landed on every council delegate's screen. He said it with heat, with the particular anger of a person who had been completely confident about something and was now working through what it felt like to have been wrong. None of the other delegates disagreed with him. None of them said so, either. There was a kind of silence in that room that had texture to it, a silence that understood what the word times, extortion times, would cost them to put on record. Given that in 8 months, they would all need to route freight through a hub owned by a cooperative of the very people the expansion clause had displaced. The Dravani delegate had already signed the protein contract. She did not mention this in the caucus. She did not need to. Her presence, and the fact that she was there rather than meeting with Earth's Trade Bureau, said enough. The Sulhari delegate asked if anyone had a counterproposal. Nobody did. The Mean Collective asked what happened if they simply did not respond. The room considered that. The room considered what times not responding times would mean for the 4 infrastructure contracts currently in execution, the contractors currently embedded in council systems, the resupply chain, the navigation beacons. All of it quietly staffed and run by people who had filed routine transfer requests a year and a half ago. Nobody liked the answer. The Vorathi delegate had been invited to the caucus as a courtesy. She sat in the corner and said nothing for the first hour. Then, when the conversation had turned for the 3rd time to the same arguments going nowhere, she raised one finger. The room went quiet. It always went quiet for her. 6,000 years of institutional history had a gravity to it. She said, "Give them what they want." The Keth delegate started to respond. She continued, without looking at him. "You already gave them what they needed. 18 months ago, in this very forum, you gave them the relocation money and the open contracts and the right to move freely while everyone stopped watching. You gave them the materials." She paused. "The framework they sent is just the invoice." The room was very still. "Give them what they want," she said again, "before they identify what else you have that they could use." The formal vote on humanity's re-engagement terms took 11 days. The first to confirm acceptance were the Dravani. The morning the confirmation was filed, the Dravani freight director was on a call with the Ort Hub's operations manager, discussing a rate adjustment for Q3. The timing was not deliberate. It simply reflected where their actual concerns had migrated. The Sulhari followed. Then the outer rim block, collectively, in a single filing that took everyone slightly by surprise by how fast it moved once one delegate in the group committed. Then the Mean Collective, with a statement so long and full of qualifications that it took an hour to read and still resolved to yes. The Keth held out. They held for 11 days. The Admiral had been in daily communication with the Dominion High Council. He had made every argument. He had used words like times, precedent times, and times, capitulation times, and times, the dignity of the agreement. He had been heard. He had been respected. He had been, in the end, gently and firmly overruled by ministers who had received Vestalun's report and who had their own logistical people running their own numbers. On day 11, the Keth filed their acceptance. No statement accompanied it. Just the filing. Just the yes. The confirmation was transmitted to Earth's Trade Bureau at 14:32 Forum Standard Time. The Bureau's automated system logged it at 14:33. A copy was routed to Ambassador Yara Osei at her current location, which was listed in the Bureau's internal directory as Times Ort Hub Administrative, Temp. She had been there for 8 months. She had her coffee maker, her good chair, and a desk covered in spreadsheets that her colleagues had learned not to disturb. She had been doing many specific and interconnected things that she had not announced, because that was not a thing she did. She read the confirmation on her tablet. She finished her coffee. The mug had Earth written on it in small letters, the old flag design, the kind of thing you bought in airport gift shops and never threw away. She set it down, opened a reply window, typed 4 words, and sent them before the message had been fully processed by the Bureau's routing system. See you Thursday. She closed the tablet and went back to her spreadsheet. Outside the hub's viewport, the long dark of the Oort cloud stretched in every direction, quiet, cold, and full of things still being built. Yara Osei arrived early. This was noted in 11 diplomatic dispatches before the session even started. The forum's internal monitoring systems logged her entry at 7:14 Forum Standard Time, which was 46 minutes before any other delegate typically arrived, and an hour and 12 minutes before the session was scheduled to open. The dispatches used different words for it times, punctual, strategic, deliberate, calculated times, but they all logged it. Because when your institution has spent 18 months quietly rearranging around a single person's absence, her first reappearance in the building carries weight that the routine language of diplomacy struggles to hold. She had coffee, a thermos she carried herself, the same one she had been carrying for years banged up at the base, a small dent on the lid that she had never bothered to fix. She sat in seat 7 and poured a cup into the thermos cap and drank it slowly and read something on her tablet. The Vorathi delegate arrived 20 minutes later. This was unusual. The Vorathi typically entered with the general tide of delegates, unhurried, ancient in her timing. Today she came in while the forum was still mostly empty, her footsteps quiet on the carved floor, her aide trailing 3 steps behind as always. She took her usual seat 7 rows up from the central floor, in the section reserved for founding species, and she looked at seat 7 for a moment. Yara looked up. Something passed between them. Not a smile exactly, a recognition. The kind that happens between 2 people who have independently arrived at the same conclusion about something and have not yet said it out loud. Yara held up the thermos. An offer. The Vorathi delegate's aide looked alarmed. 6,000-year-old beings did not typically accept coffee from junior ambassadors they had never spoken to directly. There were protocols. There were species-specific dietary reviews. There was precedent to consider. The Vorathi delegate stood, walked the 7 rows down, and sat in the empty seat beside Yara. She accepted the coffee. She drank it. She did not visibly react to the taste, which was, Yara's colleagues back on Earth would have said, honestly the correct reaction to what was in that thermos. They sat together in the quiet of the empty forum for 22 minutes, while delegates filtered in around them, and the forum filled, and the ambient noise of 10,000 species began to build. They did not appear to speak much. The aide, watching from above, could not hear what they said. He wrote in his personal log that evening that they seemed, for those 22 minutes, less like a junior ambassador and a founding species elder, and more like 2 people who had both watched the same thing happen and were simply acknowledging that they had both seen it. The session opened. The delegates were all present. More observers in the gallery than anyone could remember. The press platforms were at capacity. 7 species had sent dedicated media teams. The return of the human delegation to the forum, under the terms of the new agreement, was being covered like an event because it was an event, though different observers had different ideas about what kind. Speaker Ixoth called the room to order. His voice was steady. His posture was steady. He was a professional, and he had managed harder sessions than this one. He read the formal acknowledgement of humanity's return to the forum, the confirmation of permanent seat status, the terms of the re-engagement agreement. His voice did not change as he read the phrase "Times full veto rights" on matters affecting human-adjacent space. He was very good at his job. When he finished, he opened the floor for the session's first vote. A minor trade clause, something about standardizing measurement units for a class of docking connectors used in mid-range freight vessels. It had been sitting in committee for 3 months, stuck on a technical disagreement between two species whose logistics systems use different base numbers. Completely routine. The kind of motion that existed in every session, the institutional equivalent of paperwork. Every delegate had been told, informally, through the networks that information traveled before official records, that the first vote would be something small, something easy, something that would let the room breathe. Yara voted yes. The relief was physical. Not metaphorical, genuinely physical. Pressure systems shifted in 6 atmospheric sections of the forum. The Sulhari contingent rippled with a wave of bioluminescence that their cultural observers would later classify as Time's communal exhale. 3 delegates who communicated via subtle changes in skin color and had been in a state of pale tension for the last 40 minutes, visibly deepened toward their normal tones. The Keth delegate, who had not slept well in 11 days, exhaled so audibly that the delegate beside him looked over. He straightened in his chair and looked at the vote display with studied neutrality, the practiced expression of a person pretending not to have just done something embarrassing. The second vote moved through cleanly. Infrastructure funding for an expansion of the forum's translation relay network. Yara voted yes. The room's temperature dropped another fraction toward normal. Tension had a smell in rooms like this. Most species could detect it. It had been present since the session opened. A particular quality in the air, not quite fear, not quite alertness, something between them. With the second yes vote, it began, slowly, to thin. The third vote was called Keth Petition 7712B. A secondary trade corridor application, a proposed route through the Helios belt, connecting 2 Keth industrial clusters that were currently served by a slower and more expensive path. It had been in early discussion before Yara walked out 18 months ago. It had been waiting since. Yara put her coffee thermos down. The sound was small, the thermos cap meeting the surface of the desk. An ordinary object, making an ordinary sound. The forum went quiet before she opened her mouth. It went quiet the way a room goes quiet, when the door opens that you've been watching for an hour, not because of anything dramatic, just because the waiting is over, and the body knows it before the mind catches up. 7 species registered atmospheric pressure changes. The Sulhari bioluminescent signal spread through their entire contingent and stayed there. The Keth delegate sat completely still. Yara looked at the vote panel. She looked at it for exactly the kind of time it takes to actually read something and think about it, which is different from the amount of time it takes to perform reading and thinking, and the difference was perceptible. She voted yes, with amendments. The amendments appeared on the shared display. 3 of them. Framed in polite technical language. Small on the surface route specifications, timing protocols. A clause about third-party infrastructure access along the corridor's operational range. The kind of details that looked administrative until someone who understood logistics read them carefully, at which point they revealed themselves as structural changes to how the corridor would function in practice, changes that would take, based on current transit patterns, approximately 18 months to fully understand. The Keth delegate exhaled, visibly, audibly, in a way that was not dignified and that he would think about later. His shoulders dropped a full inch. The amendments were logged. The motion carried with the amended terms. The session moved forward. Yara picked up her coffee. She made a note on her tablet. Nobody could see what the note said. The aide, watching from his position near the Vorathi delegates section, wrote in his log that her expression while making the note was completely neutral, not satisfied, not calculating, not anything he could name. Just present. Just a person at work. The session continued. More votes. More routine motion. The forum doing what the forum did. Yara voted with consistency and care. She asked 2 questions, both technical, both precise, both answered without incident. She spoke no more than she needed to. At the session's end, as delegates rose and the forum began its slow emptying, she stopped to talk to a Dravani representative from the merchant consortium near the central floor exit. They were talking about something involving freight schedules. The Dravani representative laughed at something she said. She laughed too, easily, the way people laugh when they actually find something funny, rather than when they are performing finding something funny. The Vorathi delegate watched this from the steps, waiting for her aide to catch up with her files. He arrived at her side, slightly out of breath. The session went smoothly, he said. Yes, she said. The Keth looked relieved. They should be, she said. She did not look away from Yara and the Drevani representative, now joined by someone from the Outer Rim technical block. Another laugh. Another easy conversation. More people drifting over in the natural way that people drift towards someone who is warm and unhurried and interested in what you are saying. The amendments on Petition 712B, the aide said, reading from his notes. Legal is still reviewing. They say the operational implications aren't fully. They won't be, she said. Not for a while. The aide looked up. He had worked with her for 60 years. He had learned to pay attention when her voice had that particular quality level and specific, each word placed where it needed to be. She won't be the last one, the Vorathi said. This is the pattern now. They know what they are. They know what they can do. Others will have watched this. Others will have taken notes. She paused. The Galactic Council will never make the same mistake again. Not with humans. Another pause. It won't matter. They'll find the next mistake. The aide thought about this. Should we be worried? She was quiet for a moment. Yara was still talking below 3 delegates now, all leaning slightly in, all listening. The frightening ones, the Vorathi said, are never the ones who shout. The aide waited. The frightening ones bring biscuits. They learn your schedule. They show up early, and make coffee, and remember the names of your assistants. They build things in the dark while you are busy celebrating. She turned finally, walking toward the exit. By the time you understand what you are looking at, you are already standing inside it. Her aide wrote all of this down. He was not sure he understood it yet, he thought, looking back one more time, at Yara Osei laughing with 3 council delegates in the emptying forum, her battered thermos in one hand and her tablet in the other, comfortable in her permanent seat in a room that had learned, at considerable cost, to take her seriously. He thought he would understand it later. He was right.